3 years after launching airstrikes in Yemen, Saudi Arabia is under attack. Houthi rebels fired 7 missiles deep into its territory on Sunday, warning there's more to come. So, is Saudi now more vulnerable? And does anyone know how or when the war will end? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. The options are between bad and worse. That's how Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman defends the Saudi military intervention in Yemen. After 3 years, the situation could not be any worse. 10,000 killed in the fighting, thousands more dead from the worst recorded outbreak of cholera, and millions facing famine. The UN calls Yemen the world's worst humanitarian crisis, while the internationally recognized government of Yemen has found itself undermined by competing interests in the Saudi-led coalition. The Houthis have shown no signs of ceding ground, and now they've targeted Riyadh and 3 other Saudi cities with missiles. Osama bin Javed has more.
As the rockets rained down, there were moments of panic. This is what's left of a missile fired by Houthi rebels in Yemen, which targeted the Saudi capital Riyadh on Sunday. Another fragment landed on an island on a busy road. A barrage of 7 ballistic missiles were intercepted by Saudi Arabia's air defense. Multiple social media users posted videos of the US Patriot missile defense system used by the Saudi military. At least 1 Egyptian resident was killed in the attack. As forensic teams collect evidence, the Saudi coalition is again blaming Iran for arming the Houthi fighters.
The Quds force, who have operatives on the ground in Yemen, have helped the Houthis and the Yemeni armed forces to basically augment the capability of the missiles in order to make them more capable. And the Houthis say, you know, if you don't negotiate with us, we will continue with more sophisticated weaponry, more missiles being fired, and there will be more dead on the side of Saudi Arabia, which is something they can't sustain.
These types of attacks continue despite the Saudi coalition announcing in 2015 that most of the Houthis' ballistic arsenal was destroyed.
The objective is to continue to look for these kind of missiles, to target it, destroy it. We believe that we destroy most of these capabilities.
Thousands gathered in the capital, Sana'a, to mark 3 years since the Saudi-led coalition launched a military campaign to fight the Houthis in support of Yemen's government. Just before the missile attack, the Houthi leader talked about his group's capabilities.
We'll use long-range drones, which have excellent military capabilities. We will activate the military institutions in an unprecedented way and open up more opportunities to recruit the children and men of our people to fight.
The Houthis have been sharing images of the destruction caused by Saudi attacks in Yemen. They say their missiles are acts of revenge. At least 10,000 people on all sides have been killed in Yemen, and millions more suffer in what UN calls the worst humanitarian crisis in recent years. And through all this, the war continues. Osama bin Javed, Jazeera.
Well, the Saudi-led coalition's campaign of airstrikes may have destroyed several Houthi positions, ammunition depots and bases, but has largely failed to make significant military gains on the ground. The Iran-backed rebels hold the capital Sana'a, most of North Yemen and the largest port of Hodeidah. Pro-Saudi-led coalition forces are in control of mainly central Yemen and areas to the south, including Aden. But after a recent rift between the Houthi government and the UAE, separatists loyal to the Emirates overran the city, taking over several government buildings and institutions. And al-Qaeda-affiliated groups were quick to take advantage of the split, expanding their control of territory in the south. Well, let's bring in our panel now. From London, Mohammed Jumeh, columnist and editor at the Quds newspaper. In Beirut, Adam Barron, visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. And from Djibouti via Skype, Suze van Meegen, protection and advocacy advisor at the Norwegian Refugee Council. Welcome to you all. Mr. Barron, let me start with you. The Houthis have not only withstood 3 years of Saudi-led coalition attacks, but have now increased their attacks on Saudi. I mean, what does this say about their military strength and their capability right now?
I think when you look at the Houthis' resilience in I guess, in the face of the ongoing military operation led by the side of the coalition, it's key to sort of compare sort of areas that you can refer to as the Houthis' home turf with areas that they don't have a strong history in. So if you look, the Houthis have sustained massive losses. They lost control of Aden, which, their incursion to Aden was one of the first things that really pushed the coalition to begin their operations in Yemen. They've lost significant parts of they've lost roughly the entire south. They've lost Marib most recently this year. They lost Behan and Shabwa, and they lost the Red Sea coast. That being said, when you're looking at the areas where you really are seeing the Houthis manage to hold on, it's these kind of northern highlands that have proven, in a lot of ways, if you can go back centuries, these have proven a very hard area to take militarily. So because they have this sort of control in a lot of ways, a lot of the Houthi leaders are experienced in Saada, which is one of the roughest terrains in the entire country. This has allowed them to really hold fast on that end. This comes in addition to the fact that you have seen, from what we've seen, evidence of increasing Iranian support, which is still managing to come through in the form of these missiles particularly, despite the ongoing blockade on the country and the ongoing attempt to prevent these missiles from going in. So you've seen sort of a combination. One, the Houthis are fighting for the most part on their home turf now, so it's going to be hard to get them in. But on the other hand, let's face it, the signs are that they have had some outside help. Although I wouldn't say it's this, while the Houthis would not be able to do things like most notably launch missiles at Riyadh if it wasn't for this outside help apparently coming from Iran. By and large, their ability to really hold fast is rooted in their real experience fighting.
Yeah, and we will talk about
Yemen.
that outside help more definitely. But Mr. Jumeh, let me bring you in now. So they have, of course, suffered losses, but they've also proven on the third anniversary of the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen that they are capable of hitting Riyadh. So is Saudi Arabia secure?
Well, I think in terms of liberating nearly two-thirds of the Yemen land from the Houthis, and in terms of making the Houthis only in the capital, it's important to control the capital, but they lose, as our colleague said, they lose most of the land, and they lost most of their capabilities in terms of the weapons. That doesn't mean they didn't get so many missiles from Iran to launch to Saudi Arabia in order to send different messages to Saudi Arabians and to the Arab coalitions, to the outside world, and to the Yemenis inside, to their supporters inside, to say that we are strong. We are still strong. We are still able to send and to launch missiles to Riyadh, to different cities inside the Saudi lands. Yes, in some aspect, they are weakened. In so many governorate provinces, they are so weak, they kicked out of these governorates. But in their own land, high land, they are still strong, and they have supporters, and taken into consideration the missiles given to them from the Iranians, they are still able to hit some cities in Saudi Arabia, to send different messages, as I said, strongly to the supporters who gathered today in Sana'a, to show them that they are still strong, and they can, after 3 years, they still can attack Saudi Arabia.
Ms. Van Meegen, as an aid worker, how do you see the latest escalation in the violence? What will it mean for the millions of Yemenis who are already suffering through what the UN has called the world's worst humanitarian crisis?
Well, it's very clear to us that the parties to this conflict are not only using violence, they're using war tactics that undermine the capacity of Yemenis to afford food, to go to school, to keep their jobs, and to access clean water. The cholera outbreak we've seen that has now reached more than 1 million cases isn't a coincidence. The blockade on Hodeidah port and subsequent difficulties moving supplies around Yemen aren't a coincidence. None of this is organic. All of it is a man-made crisis. So we would see that the violence we've seen is having a huge impact on people, but so too are the more insidious war tactics being used by all parties to the conflict.
And the crisis, it seems, could get worse. We've had the Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi vow to use more developed weapons, missile systems, he said, will overcome all defence systems to target Saudi Arabia. Mr. Barron, who is arming the Houthis? Where are they getting their weapons from?
I mean, a large portion of the Houthis' weapons are coming from inside Yemen itself. Let's not forget that one of the most notorious arms markets, if not the most notorious arms market, is right in Sada. The Houthis have long built ties with many of Yemen's most notable arms dealers. That being said, there are, according to UN expert testimony, there are components of weapons that appear to be coming from Iran that are being used in these missiles that are apparently able to strike Riyadh. You hear different things. Some say that these are actually, full-on Iranian missiles. What a lot of people are hearing and a lot of experts are saying is that you're seeing, components being attached to missiles that increase their range. And then in addition to that, there are some reports, there was just a report released today, alleging that both there's been Iranian radio technology used. So it would appear that, for the most part, the weapons are by and large weapons that have already been in Yemen, although there are pretty credible reports that the Houthis are getting weapons from elsewhere as well.
And how do they, if the weapons are coming from overseas, how do they get them into the country despite the different blockades? Are they bringing parts in and then assembling them in Yemen?
Yeah, it would appear that that's how it's happening. And you're having, there's a number of different theories going around. I believe it was one of the UN panel of experts reports said that they were basically taking advantage of, these kind of secluded or remote coves or small ports on Yemen's, in eastern Yemen, to kind of sneak in parts and things like that. You are seeing, even areas of Yemen that are ostensibly under the control of the internationally recognized government do have kind of weaknesses in control. So it would appear that they're sort of taking advantage, like many other groups in Yemen, taking advantage of the wider power vacuum to smuggle weapons in.
So weapons being provided both from inside Yemen that are already there and also being brought in from overseas. What about support for the Houthis? Mr. Jumeh, Abdul Malik al-Houthi has said that they're going to recruit more men and children to keep fighting. Who's joining them? Who supports them?
They use every kind of means to be supported. They use religion to encourage people to join them, as their name is Ansarullah, means the supporters of Allah. So they are doing all these things for the sake of God. They are encouraging people to join them, to be mujahideen, to go to paradise, as in their propaganda, religious propaganda. And they use even the tribal system, because in the northern parts of Yemen, the tribal system is very strong, and they are using and they are trying to implement it for their own favor. They also are using the resources. They still have the capital, they still have the main city, the main port in Yemen in their control. They are opening the country for a big black market. So according to the report of the United Nations experts, they say that they have billions of dollars a year from different resources, from different ways of income. They are using their this resource for their own favor, to support their own military actions against the Yemenis and against the neighboring areas. Don't forget that they don't give salaries. So all money they have is used for only military actions.
Yeah, so no lack of support or resources then. Ms. Van Meegen, there is a new UN envoy for Yemen now, with talk of a new round of negotiations. Are you hopeful that this could lead to an improvement in people's lives?
Right now we feel that we have to be hopeful, because this feels like the only possible way forward. We're not seeing any other progress. We're not seeing a huge amount of support from the United Nations Security Council. We're not seeing any leadership from international governments. And meanwhile, we're meeting kids that are carrying toys that they've made to resemble guns. We're meeting kids that can't afford to go to school, so they're choosing not to eat. I met a little girl a few weeks ago who hadn't been eating. She'd been saving all her money so she could go to school. The situation for people while this carries on is getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
It's already far beyond what we expected. So we have high hopes for the special envoy, but we also call conflict to engage appropriately.
And Mr. Barron, what do you think about the prospect of a new round of negotiations with a new UN envoy for Yemen? The British government said that they want to play a bigger role in negotiations. And the fact that the Houthis are increasing their attacks at this time, I mean, is this a tactic before going into negotiations to force the Saudi hand?
Yeah, I would say as of 24 hours ago, 48 hours ago, there was a great degree of pressure being exerted by various international actors pushing for there to be negotiations that would start up soon. Needless to say, it's hard for international actors to try to push, for example, the Saudis or the internationally recognized Yemeni government to come to the table when the Houthis are launching missiles at the Riyadh or into Saudi. So it does, but I think for the Houthis, they do view this as a way of sending a message. They do view this as a negotiating tactic. It often tends to backfire, I think. But I think for them, this is something that serves on two methods. They're launching the missiles to send a message, externally, but even they're sending it internally as well, sending a message to try to rally their supporters ahead of the rallies that the Houthis are holding today, to say we're still strong, we're fighting back, we're making them, hitting them where it hurts, etc. But needless to say, that's evidence of a mindset which unfortunately is quite widespread among Yemen's various key power holders, a mindset that isn't particularly conducive to peace talks being held in good faith.
No, to ending the war. Mr. Jumeh, as Mr. Barron was saying, that the Houthis are sending a message. They're saying, we're still here, we're still strong, we're still fighting. Where is that internationally recognised government? I mean, we know that Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi, the president, is in Saudi Arabia, but just last week we had the Minister of State resign, saying that this government is being held essentially under house arrest in Saudi. What do you make of that?
Well, I think we need to be more specific of using terminologies. A house arrest means somebody who is in house arrest, he cannot make even a phone call outside his or her house. President Hadi, yes, he's in Riyadh, but we could see his every day on a daily basis meet different people, ambassadors, officials, Yemenis, non-Yemenis, Arabs, international
sure, but
officials.
He's not in the country. Why is that? And does he need to be?
This is another thing. Yes, he is not under house arrest in Saudi Arabia, but he cannot go to Aden. I think, from my point of view, for different reasons. Maybe the main two reasons are for the security situation in Aden. It's not stable. So because the Saudi-led coalition depends on him, on the legitimacy they are taken from him. So they do want him to go to Aden for his own safety. And I think there are some differences in Aden politically and security, in a security basis, which don't allow him to go back to Aden.
Mr. Barron, Mohammed Jumeh was talking about the legitimacy of the president. How much legitimacy do you think that this government still has? Is it united enough to take on a new round of negotiations?
I mean, this is the Yemen's, internationally recognized government, and its sort of legitimacy is enshrined in UN Resolution 2216. So on the one hand, there's no real question about that. That being said, you are seeing a number of different divisions within both the government itself, and particularly within, you can call it the anti-Houthi axis. You've seen that in Aden, where different groups that are united against the Houthis, and united in support of the Arab coalition, but divided against each other, have engaged in fighting, most notably earlier this year, when you saw a significant amount of fighting between pro-Hadi forces and pro-Southern Transitional Council forces that in many cases were fighting on the same side against the Houthis, 2.5 years ago. So there is this extent that you have when you have a situation where the president has been based out of the country for a significant amount of time, where many of the ministers, although by no means all ministers, have been based out of the government for a significant amount of time, you know, in a lot of ways, Yemen's state institutions on both sides of this conflict have really been at risk. There's been some real deterioration there.
Yeah, and Mr.
So
Jumeh,
that's something that's a real challenge moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely, one of many challenges. Mr. Jumeh, let me bring you in on that point about division in the international coalition. I mean, what does that mean for negotiations when you have parties within the coalition, you know, the Saudis who support President Hadi and the UAE, which is part of the coalition? Yes, they're fighting alongside the Saudis in attacking the Houthis, but they're also supporting the southern secessionists against President Hadi.
Well, I think this is one of the main problems the Saudi-led coalitions face, and it affects the government. It affects the going back of the governments to Yemen. And I think it's weakened the government to the situation that the Houthis are still strong. One of the main of the strength factor behind the Houthis being still strong until now is the division within the other side, within the government, within the Saudi-led coalition. There is no big division between Emirates and Saudi Arabia in terms of Yemen, but it seems that the Emirates doesn't want to deal with the Al-Islah party, who is the like Muslim Brotherhood party in Yemen. That's why they went and support some other groups. They are sort of separatists in Yemen, and this is creating problem in with Hadi, preventing him from going back to Aden, because Hadi believe in a united Yemen, in a different way of union, but those people in Aden, they don't believe in Yemen, one Yemen, united Yemen, and they want to go back to the situation before 1990 in Yemen.
Ms. Van Meegen, as this incredibly complicated situation politically continues in Yemen, and we have reached the 3rd anniversary, what are aid groups, what are you and aid groups like yourselves calling for that really needs to happen immediately?
Well, there are a few things. We know that humanitarian aid is not the answer for Yemen, but in the meantime, people urgently need access to services. They need food, they need access to cash. Salaries must be paid after more than a year and a half of non-payment in areas under the control of Ansar Allah. So we need the international community to step up and continue to provide funding for Yemen, but also to look for means that will help us continue to access people. In the longer term, we need much better engagement, excuse me, from the international community, including the Security Council, from the UK as penholder, from the US, who's continuing to sell weapons, despite all the evidence that civilians are being adversely affected by the war.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. We don't have very long left, so I do want to get a couple of, one last question into both of our other guests, Mohammed Jumeh and Adam Barron. Mohammed, let me start with you, but the same question to you as well. What is it going to take to actually end this war in Yemen?
Sorry, say it again?
What is it going to take, Mr. Jumeh, do you think, to end this war in Yemen?
I think to go back to negotiation, but according to the 3 references of the political solution, peaceful solution. The first one is the GCC's initiative. Secondly, the outcomes of the national dialogue in Yemen. And third, the United Nations resolutions.
And Mr. Barron, what about you?
To be honest, I don't know, I'm quite pessimistic, because when we look at it now, and we have to remember this, we're not talking about a single war, we're not talking about a single conflict, we're talking about a series of interlocking conflicts in Yemen. And when it comes down to it, even if there's some sort of, agreement reached between the 2 primary sides, there's a huge risk that you're going to see a spiraling that's going to affect Yemen for generations to come.
Mr. Barron, thank you very much for that. Let me thank all of our guests, Mohammed Jumeh in London, Adam Barron in Beirut, and Suze Van Meegen in Djibouti. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here, thank you for watching, and bye for now.